I'm Ron. Thanks for checking this out. Now, if you've ever tried playing your Native American flute or Native American style flute into a tuner, you know that most of our flutes don't automatically produce pitches that line up exactly with letter names on the tuner. But by the end of today's video, I hope you'll agree that there are more important and more fun things to do with our tuner than just try to line up letter names with our flute. I'll be using my usual flute in A today, but I also have another flute not in A. If you want to try out some of these things, flute in A would be a good choice. If you have a tuner or a tuner app, you might want to keep that handy too. Today's video might be a little longer than usual, so feel free to take breaks along the way. I promise I'm not going to load you down with a bunch of classical music theory jargon. We don't need it for what we're doing today. So let's get started. I'm going to play a series of pitches on one of my flutes. I'm going to try to make them all pretty much the same duration, so you're not going to hear a strong rhythm pattern, just a series of evenly spaced pitches. Now, even without the usual rhythms, I'm willing to bet that most of you recognize that as the first phrase of Amazing Grace. All right, now I'm going to play a series of pitches on a different flute. And I'm willing to bet that most of you would agree that I just played the first phrase of Amazing Grace again. And you'd be right. Now, the first flute that I was playing was my usual flute that I use for these videos, kind of a state-of-the-art contemporary Native American style flute in A. The second flute that I was playing was a more traditionally made Choctaw river cane flute. These two flutes played completely different pitches. I assure you, you didn't hear any same pitches between these two flutes. And yet your ears had no trouble at all identifying that I was playing the same melody on each flute. So how does that happen? Well, I would suggest to you that it's the relationships between the pitches that you're hearing that made the difference. And this is a really important takeaway for today. The relationships between pitches are much more important than the individual pitches. Now, definite pitch is an important aspect of musical sound that our tuners measure as a frequency. Sound reaches our ears as waves in a waveform, and frequency is a measure of how many complete wave cycles reach our ear per second. So when I play my flute into a tuner and a number pops up, 440, that's telling me that the pitch I'm playing is sending a waveform, and 440 cycles of that waveform are hitting my ear per second. Sometimes you'll hear the term 440 hertz. Hertz is the guy who figured out how to measure this, and so his name gets attached. It's just shorthand. It just means cycles per second. 440 hertz equals 440 cycles per second. Now, it's the ratios between frequencies that are the building blocks of our tuning systems and our musical structures. So again, our takeaway for today, the relationships between pitches matter much, much more than the individual pitches. Musicians often use the term interval to describe the distance between two pitches. Visualize a keyboard. How many keys did you have to move to get from one pitch to another? That's one way of visualizing the idea of interval. Some pitches are very far apart on the keyboard, but some pitches are actually so close together that they would both fit in the same crack between adjacent keys. Now think back to Amazing Grace again. Remember, it wasn't the individual notes that helped your ears recognize the tune on both flutes. Your ears recognized that tune because of a series of intervals that was familiar to you. So I'm going to suggest that you start thinking about songs not as a collection of pitches, but as a pattern of intervals and rhythms. We'll talk about rhythm another time. Today we're focused on pitch. There are thousands of musical cultures on planet Earth, and almost as many ways of thinking about musical relationships and intervals. Here in the US, all of our machines, like our keyboards and our tuner apps and our recording software, you name it, they all default to the same tuning system right out of the box. They all default to the Euroclassical 12-tone equal temperament system with a reference pitch of A440. Don't worry if that language means nothing to you at this point. We will unpack what we need of it as we go along. Now, our machines do this mainly because of colonialism and economic interests. I've talked about some of these issues in other videos, like Are You Playing Your Native Flute in Tune? And Decolonize Your Native American Flute. You can check those out at your leisure. There are links in the description box. Today, we are coming at this from a purely practical perspective. So we're just going to suck it up and accept that that's what our machines do. And that means that we're going to be referencing the Euroclassical system throughout this. But I want you always to be aware that there is nothing objectively true about what our tuners are telling us. They are simply showing us how something fits or doesn't fit into a particular system of musical thought. And in fact, we can even use our 12-tone equal-tempered tuner to start to help to free us from some of the constraints of that very system. Now, if you want, this might be a nice time to hit pause. Take a little time out, play some of your flutes into your own tuner or tuner app, and just enjoy watching the wheels spin and the numbers go up and down. See if you can play with such a steady breath that the wheels hold still for a little bit. Right? See what happens if you blow a little harder. What happens if you back off the breath a little bit. Have fun. I'll see you in a few. Okay, let's take a little tour of my tuning app and see what it's showing us and how we can make use of it. Now, for a lot of the rest of the video, you're actually going to be seeing a screen recording of the app in action as it responds to things that I'm doing on the flute. I use ClearTune app. I think there is a free version at the App Store. One of the things I really like about it is that it does offer a variety of tuning systems, but we're going to use the default setting today, and of course that is 12-tone equal temperament A440. There are two parts of the app I want to show you. The little box here at the top shows a simple measure of frequency. You can see that it also assigns a letter name to the frequency. The letter names are from the Euroclassical system. We'll talk about them later. When I play the lowest note on my flute in A, notice that the number keeps changing a little bit. I'm a human, not a machine. So my breath pressure is continually changing, and this app quickly measures the resulting change in frequency all the way down to the 10th of a cycle per second, which is a finer measurement than most of us can hear. But also notice that the letter name stays the same through a pretty large range of frequencies. When I say that the current Euroclassical system in the US uses a reference pitch of A440, I'm basically giving you an address in musical space. If you were to go to a classical orchestra concert, even before the concert starts, an oboe player will come out and give the orchestra a tuning pitch of A440, and all the other instruments will try to get into exactly the same spot. That's just to make sure that everybody's playing at the same address. The oboist could just as easily give them A438 and nobody would know the difference. That's too small a change for many of us to even hear. And in fact, everybody would still be playing 12-tone equal temperament system. They'd just be playing it at a slightly different spot in musical space. Even in the Euroclassical tradition, we know that historically the reference pitch has changed greatly over the centuries. We have good documentation that there were 18th century musicians like Handel and Mozart, no less, who liked their A to be tuned to somewhere around 422 or 423. That's almost an entire key left on your keyboard from where it is now. Even when I was a student, which was not 3 centuries ago, but was last century, I spent some time in Vienna. And I don't know if it's still like this in Vienna, but at the time you could actually call up a public service number on your telephone and they would give you a tuning pitch. Except that it wasn't A440 like it was over here in the US. It was around A434, if I remember correctly. But what I really want to emphasize here is that the musicians in Vienna were still using the same tuning system as the musicians in Washington, D.C. The orchestras were all playing 12-tone equal temperament system. They were simply playing it at a slightly different address. Now, this is a really, really important thing to keep in mind when we talk about tuning systems in general and when we talk about our flutes and our historical flutes and flutes from different traditions. So just kind of park that idea in the back of your mind. We will come back to it someday. If you ever want to take a deeper dive into things than we're doing here on the videos, or if you just want to move through material more quickly than we are here on the videos, feel free to contact me. You can reach me right here on YouTube, or you can visit my website. There's a link in the description box. Send me a message there. It might be that some individual online lessons or maybe a live stream workshop with some of your Flute Circle friends might be a good fit for you, and we can work that out without too much pain. So feel free to be in touch. Let's take a look at the big wheel at the bottom of my tuner. The letters on the wheel are pitch names in the Euroclassical system, and you'll notice that there's a little green arrow right at 12 o'clock on the wheel. If I play the lowest note of my medium A Native American style flute, I can use my breath to make sure that A is right on target, the target here being 440 hertz. The arrow will light up when I hit the target. When I first started, the arrow was to the left of the target pitch A. That meant that the frequency I was playing was a little lower than the target. I can just add a little bit more air, blow a little bit harder, and that will pull the pitch right to where it needs to be. If the arrow were to the right-hand side, that would mean that I'm higher than I need to be, and I can back off the breath, and again, that will take the pitch right to the target. Notice how much I can make the wheel move just by using my breath. Now watch what happens when I play a minor pentatonic scale from low to high. That bottom A will be around 440, and at the top of the scale, the wheel will have gone all the way around, all the way back to A, but notice that the frequency now will be somewhere around 880. Of course, the ratio of A880 to A440 is 2:1. Many basic ratios that we use in music are derived from the overtone series, which we hear in the natural resonances of things all around us all the time. All musical cultures seem to agree about one thing. Pitches whose frequencies have a ratio of 2:1 are considered to be the same note for all musical purposes. Imagine a large group of men, women, and children all singing the melody of Amazing Grace together. Some of them will be singing down here, and some of them will be singing up here. But we agree that all are singing the same notes and the same melody as long as we keep hearing 2:1 ratios. In Euroclassical music, the jargon term for this is octave equivalence, so you can just park that. We won't be using that. But this ratio is true whether or not the notes and pitches that we're hearing actually match keys on our tuner or not. 2:1 is 2:1 is 2:1, no matter where it is in musical space. Now, within that measured interval, that ratio of 2:1, what frequencies are used and the ratios they express with each other varies tremendously from culture to culture. The Euroclassical system divides the octave into 12 equal parts that are called 12 steps. Now on your keyboard, moving a half step means moving from one key to the very next key, either up or down. So if you move up a half step, you've moved up one key. If you move down a half step, you're going to go down one key. We're going to refer to that interval as 1. If you find an A on your keyboard and then find the next A up from there, you will see that you have moved 12 keys. On our TUNER app, 1/2 step means moving from one letter name to the very next letter name in either direction. Now, in the 12-tone equal tempered system, the ratios between frequencies is the same for all half steps. This was done to accommodate the kind of music that European musicians wanted to make. They wanted to be able to make big harmonic moves without it sounding like their instrument was going out of tune. And the system does this reasonably well. And songs like John Coltrane's Giant Steps rely on this system just as much as a Stravinsky symphony does. But on the downside, it does distort some of the ratios that occur in the natural resonance of the overtone series. So in a real sense, 12-tone equal tempered keyboards can play acceptably well in all keys by being slightly but equally out of tune in all keys. Many musical cultures prefer natural resonances, and so they don't use the 12-tone equal tempered system. Pianos are designed to play very discrete pitches. There is, in fact, an infinity of frequencies between any two piano keys and between each of the half steps in the 12-tone equal tempered system. Most cultures make use of these frequencies in some way. That's a conversation for another day. Going back to our tuner, the hash marks between letter names represent finer measurements of frequency. We could think of them as the pitches in the cracks between the piano keys. The tuner is divided each step into 100 equal parts called cents, so each hash mark equals 10 cents. If I play this note on my flute, the tuner is telling me that I'm close to the frequency called D, but I'm about 20 cents on the flat side of that. I'm somewhere in the crack between the keys D and D flat. I can use my breath, of course, to hit that target pitch if I want to. On some of my flutes, on some pitches, I can actually move the wheel as much as 70 or 80 cents just using my breath. That's almost a full half step that I can make in the adjustment of the tuning just using my breath. So keeping this in mind, when I move an interval of a half step in this system, or have moved an interval of one piano key, or have moved one letter name on my tuner, I've moved 100 cents. And going forward, we're going to refer to this interval as 1. And we really don't care if we're exactly matching the letter names on the tuner. What we care about is that the wheel has moved 100 cents. So here's another important takeaway for today. 100 cents equals 100 cents, and it doesn't matter if the pitches are exactly lining up with letter names. 100 cents is 100 cents. We will call that interval 1. 200 cents is 200 cents. It's the equivalent of moving two piano keys, even if we're not exactly lining up with the letter names on the tuner. We will call that interval 2. And 300 cents is 300 cents. We will call that interval 3. Those are the intervals we're concerned with today, especially 2 and 3. Our ears can perceive very fine gradations of pitch if I play notes in isolation. Those pitches were only about 20 cents apart, but we can really hear the difference. Now, watch what the wheel does if I start to add vibrato. There's still a core pitch in there, but it's become a little cloudy now, and if I widen the vibrato, if I make the vibrato heavier, it will make the pitch even more cloudy. Imagine that I am playing flute with a singer friend. Imagine we're both using vibrato from time to time. Imagine that we're playing and singing different pitches constantly, and that we have guitar, bass, drums, keys, and why not a couple shakers along with us. Will anyone notice if my D is 20 cents sharp for the half second that I'm playing it? Probably not. But if the singer and I decide to end the song on the same pitch, don't use any vibrato, and the band to stop playing, will people notice if our pitches are 20 cents apart? Yes, they probably will. And that's why you don't hear many songs end that way, right? Because it's really, really hard to do. Now, let's call the very small differences and variations in pitch that people don't care about or don't notice, let's call those microtonal tolerances. And let's also be aware that in most music, it's the frequencies between the name notes where we hear all the expression and all the emotion. Here's a little project for you, and something to practice if you want. It's a basic skill for musicians to be able to hear intervals well. How many letter names did we go around the wheel to get from one pitch to another? Or how many keys did we move on the keyboard? Did I hear a 1, a 2, or a 3, or something even bigger? I'm going to play the first 4 notes of the natural scale on my flute in A. That means I'm just going to lift one finger after another, uncovering the lowest 3 holes in sequence. Watch the tuner and keep track of how many letter names I move going from note to note. I tried to play those notes pretty much on target for the letter names to make it as easy as possible. So our first move was from A to C. So our starting point was A, and then we moved 1 to B flat, and then another 1 to B, and then another letter name to C. So that means a move of 3 letter names. From C up to D, we started on C, then went to C sharp, and then up to D. So we moved 2 letter names. And from D to E is also a 2. So we ended up with an interval sequence of 3, 2, 2. But even if I start on A minus 20, A about 20 cents flat, and go to C about 20 cents flat, or C minus 20, that's still a move of 300 cents. And so for us, that still means an interval of 3. If I move from A minus 20 to C plus 10, C just a tiny bit sharp, that's a move of 330 cents now. So a slightly stretched 3, but still well within microtonal tolerances to call it a 3. So you got it? We don't care if we matched the letter names exactly. What we care about is how much did the wheel move, because that's what shows us the relationship between the pitches. And as you remember, right, the relationships between the pitches matter more than the individual pitches. Now let's put the Choctaw River Cane flute on the tuner. I'm going to try to use a steady breath and no vibrato. Here's a graphic that shows us pretty much what we heard. That first interval is really interesting, a move of 260 cents. It's probably within microtonal tolerances to still call it a 3, but it's getting close. If that number got much smaller, it might become really ambiguous. Are we hearing a small 3, or are we hearing a big 2? Now, of course, I can influence that with my breath if I want to, but I'm just going to accept without judgment that this is the interval this flute likes to play. Whatever you want to call that interval, this flute sure sounds sweet on its own. Stick around for some bonus footage at the end to see why. Most of my native flutes start with that interval pattern, 3, 2, 2, for the first 4 notes of their natural scale. Doesn't seem to matter whether it was made by an indigenous flute maker or not. Doesn't seem to matter whether it's a so-called contemporary tuning or a more culturally specific traditional tuning. Most of them start with that interval pattern 3-2-2. But not all of them. Some of them do different things. So here's a little project for you. Know your flutes. What do they actually do? Remember, we don't care if they hit letter names on your tuner. What we care about is how far the wheel moves. How many cents is it from one pitch to the next? Then you can simply go to rounded digits to describe that interval within microtonal tolerances. Be aware there will be variables. Temperature and humidity affect our flutes a lot, and of course you can always influence the outcome by how you use your breath. If you want to be really ambitious, try this to start training your ears to hear 2s and 3s. Whistle a random pitch. Or sing it, I don't care. Let your tuner tell you what it is. Now, can you imagine and whistle a pitch that's 2 above that? And your tuner will tell you if you hit the target. Now try 3 above, maybe 3 below. You can also play this game on your keyboard, even if it's just the keyboard in your GarageBand app on your phone. Hit a random key and then do the same thing. Can you imagine, sing, or whistle the pitch that would be 2 keys above that or 1 key below that? And then check yourself with the keyboard. Some people like to use familiar songs to help with this. Happy Birthday, for example, begins with an upward 2, and the familiar seasonal song Greensleeves begins with an upward 3. There are also ear training apps that you can get, but be aware that most of those are going to use Euroclassical terminology to describe the intervals. I've intentionally avoided that jargon for those of you who don't have experience with it. Some of the best musicians I've ever worked with couldn't tell you the Euroclassical names for the notes or the intervals that they were playing, but man, could they ever hear them. If you're already good at hearing intervals, what suggestions do you have that will help others be able to recognize and reproduce 2s and 3s better, or if you prefer the terminology, major seconds and minor thirds? Leave your suggestions in the comments section, please. Let's get everybody hearing well. Next time, we're going to use some of these basic intervals to start exploring the many modes and scales that we can play on our flutes. So try to get those intervals in your ears and stick around for the bonus footage right after these short end credits. You're still here, yay! Let's go back to my Choctaw River Cane flute for a sec. Here's that lowest interval measured with the tuner set to 12-tone equal temperament. Now, unless I use my breath to change things, that's a nearly ambiguous interval. Are we hearing a little 3 or are we hearing a big 2? But watch what happens when I set my tuner to just intonation. Just intonation is a system where the intervals are determined and measured by naturally occurring resonances of the overtone series. Now, the pitches still don't exactly match letter names on the tuner. Why should we expect them to do that? But the interval now looks like a nearly pure 3, almost exactly 300 cents worth of movement. According to the 12-tone equal temperament system, this was an ambiguous interval. But according to the natural occurring overtone series, this interval is right in tune. Maybe the tuner used the tuner set to just intonation. Maybe. But I suspect that more likely, the Choctaw way of making a river cane flute is concerned with natural resonances and doesn't really care about 12-tone equal temperament. Either way, pretty cool. See you next time.